Hi, this is Victor Blanco, and this mini lecture is part of the 2019 spring semester for the Master of Fisheries and Aquatic Science, Spatial Ecology and Modeling of Fish Population course. Today's lecture is entitled Complex Spatial Behaviors, Why and How the Fish School. In the last module, we had the chance to review different modeling approaches of fish population dynamics and fisheries dynamics, and the way these models are used to explain certain conditions that might result in improvement of fish stock management for its conservation and sustainable use. Today we're going to discuss a new aspect affecting fish population, which is their personality or behavior and interactions with other fish in schooling fish. The presentation is based on two papers. The first one from 2011 by Katza and collaborators about inferring the structures and dynamics of interactions in schooling fish, and the second paper from 2017 by Spiegel and collaborators about movement as a link between personality and spatial dynamics in animal populations. Many models and approaches have described how animals create and behave in flocks, schools, and swarms, but they're very complex and include actions at the individual level and at the group level. All of them are based on the movement and position of the animal, the observed kinematics, using self-propelled particle models, sonal models, statistical mechanical models, and many others. They have tried to describe these processes. However, model-based approaches are limited in the scale because most models assume that individual movement decisions result from averaging pairwise interactions with neighbors. Katza and collaborators introduced the force-based approach by mapping the instantaneous acceleration or behavioral response of a fish due to the influence of its neighbor. They test their response in the speeding and turning forces for two scenarios. The first one of a single pair or a group of two fish, and the second a shoal of three fish. This figure shows the results for the two fish configuration. In figure A is the diagram of dynamical variables. As the fish swim freely in the tank, their bodies form a natural Cartesian coordinate system. They placed the focal fish at the origin, pointing north, and measured the relative position and heading of the neighboring fish. The effective force on the focal fish or its measured acceleration is decomposed into its speeding and turning components. Figure B shows the probability of finding the neighboring fish at a given position with respect to the focal fish using the framework in A. Contours represent its levels at 10, 50, and 90% of the highest or more visited beam. Figure C and D show the speeding and turning components, respectively, of the mean measured effective force on the focal fish as a function of the neighboring fish position. For the speeding forces, positive values indicate speeding up, and negative values indicate slowing down. In the figure, we can see that when neighboring fish is just behind the focal fish speeds up to avoid collision. And when the neighboring fish is just ahead to the focal fish slows down to avoid contact with its neighbor. But when it's far ahead of the focal fish accelerates to catch up, and when it's far behind, the focal fish slows down to let its neighbor catch up with it. For the turning forces, positive values indicate a right turn and negative values indicate a left turn. We can see that when the neighboring fish is within a body length of the focal fish, there is a slight tendency to turn away from the neighbor, as shown by the small yellow and green-blue zones to the immediate left and right of the focal fish. However, when the neighboring fish is farther away from the focal fish, the turning forces are substantial. This figure shows the non-pairwise interactions in three fish shoals. Figure A is the diagram of dynamical variables describing the three fish configuration. The relative position of both neighboring fish are expressed in Cartesian coordinates with the focal fish at the origin. Velocities and effective forces are also expressed in the same way as in the two fish system that we just saw in the previous slide. In figure B1 and B2 show the measured speeding and turning forces. And figures C1 and C2 show the predicted speeding and turning forces exerted to the focal fish under the hypothesis that fish average pairwise interactions. The residual forces shown a substantial three-body effect producing a strong effective restitution forces, which is up to 100% stronger in the case of speeding and up to 25% stronger in the case of turning, when the focal fish is between both neighbors. The red patches occur when one neighbor is close behind and the other is farther ahead, showing a synergetic effect when the focal fish has two independent reasons to accelerate. Similarly, the blue patches occur when one neighbor is just ahead and the other is far behind, showing a synergetic effect when the focal fish has two independent reasons to decelerate. The work shown in contrast to classical physical systems and standard models of collective motion that three-body interactions are necessary to explain the system dynamics. Recent studies have established the ecological and evolutionary importance of animal personalities. Individual differences in movement and space use fundamental to many personality traits have been documented across many species and contexts. For instance, personality-dependent dispersal syndromes. Yet, insight from the currently developing movement ecological paradigm are rarely considered and recent evidence for other personality-dependent movement and space use lack a general unifying framework. Spiegel and collaborators propose a conceptual framework for personality-dependent spatial ecology. They address the gap between personality and movement ecology by expanding a personality-dependent dispersal framework to a personality-dependent spatial ecology framework that includes insight from movement ecology applicable to a broad range of other types of movements. This broader framework links personality and its complications for space use at the individual and population level, and it is applied to explore variations among personalities for foraging movements. For simplicity, they start by contrasting dichotomous personalities, in this case fast versus slow, differing in only one aspect of their foraging search patterns. Spiegel developed simulations to explore how this difference may affect personality-dependent habitat preference and spatial dynamic at the population level. They consider how environmental heterogeneity and individual consistency in movement that carry over across spatial scales can lead to personality dependent. First, by foraging search performance. Second, the habitat preference. Third, the home range utilization patterns. Fourth, social network structure. And fifth and last, emergence of asserted population structure with the spatial cluster of personalities. In the figure to the left, we can see the personality dependence foraging strategy and efficiency. Figure A is the conceptual behavior reaction norm of search strategy, defined as the level of area restrict search, or ARS, as a function of resource patchiness. Slow explorer, green lines, have higher tendency to area restrict search and or responsiveness compared to fast explorers, which are the blue lines. Figure to the right show personality-dependent space use at the home range scale, compared to slow agents, light green, and fast, which are the dark blue agents, are expected to have larger home range and or different home range structure. In E and F, we see that fast agents, dark blue squares, have larger home range and lower KDE 50-95 ratios compared to slow agents, which are the green circles. Some final remarks we can say: by comparing data from 2 fish and 3 fish shoals, Katza and collaborators challenged the standard assumption that individual motion results from averaging responses to each neighbor considered separately. For them, three-body interactions made a substantial contribution to fish dynamics. The observed interactions may describe the rapid changes in speed and direction that enable real animal groups to stay cohesive and amplify important social information. On the other hand, Spiegel and collaborators support a conceptual model with spatial explicit simulations of behavioral variation in space use, demonstrating the emergence of complex population-level patterns from differences in simple individual-level behaviors. A consideration of consistent individual variation in space use will facilitate mechanistic understanding of processes that drive social, spatial, ecological, and evolutionary dynamics in heterogeneous environments. In conclusion, consideration of consistent individual variation in space use will facilitate that understanding. Thank you very much.